I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
Well, as the dust settles on that very lively clash between Trump and Harris, let's talk to some people around the world, people that know what they're talking about. Joining me now is the National Pulse editor, Raheem Kassam from Washington, D.C., and a buddy of both Nigel Farage's and a buddy of Donald Trump's. Raheem, what's your verdict?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Harry. Yeah, look, I mean, I thought it was a really fiery debate, and I didn't expect anything less. I think when you think about who these two candidates were appealing to, really a very small sect of swing voters in swing states. I imagine it's probably going to be one of the largest debates ever watched, by the way, but nevertheless, they were both making their pitches to Michigan and Wisconsin and South Carolina and Pennsylvania and Georgia. And these are the states that each of these candidates need to win. So I thought that Harris scored some points on things like healthcare that will resonate in places like Georgia, in places like Pennsylvania. But Donald Trump scored points on foreign policy. He certainly scored points on trade, and that will matter in places like Michigan, in South Carolina, also in Pennsylvania. So, you know, if I'm trying to be as even-handed as possible here, I'd probably put it down as a score draw. I think, you know, she had a higher hurdle to jump than he did. She really wasn't that well known on television to most of the people who are watching tonight. And I think she met those expectations. She was, you know, at least coherent, certainly more coherent than her predecessor in the campaign, Joe Biden. And I think the benefit that Trump had on stage tonight is, while he was indignant, he was righteously indignant, and he was consistently indignant. The closing statements were what really did it for me. She was very smug and scripted, and he was very indignant about the state of the nation, which, you know, a lot of those people in swing states are.
He didn't have it took him a while to get going, I think it's fair to say. He started out quite sort of purse-lipped, quite reserved, and it wasn't really until Harris jabbed some of those key buttons, like the size of his rallies and his personal wealth, that he began to sort of lash out a little bit. Do you think that he did enough, really, to sort of define his candidate? It was almost like he's still reeling from the fact he's no longer running against Joe Biden. He was desperately trying to make her Biden's, and she's not. That's the problem, isn't it?
Well, so that's their strategy, right? And I think it's fair in an abstract sense to tie her to Joe Biden. She is the vice president. She does represent those policies. She was the border czar. She did go and meet with Zelensky 5 days before Putin decided to invade, and we heard that come up tonight. But yeah, I think you're right as well. There wasn't the ultimate definition of the candidate, of Kamala, like he wanted and needed to do. That's why she avoided committing to more than one debate, by the way. That's the worry. That's why she doesn't do a lot of media interviews. She doesn't do any podcasts. She doesn't do any shows. And he's out there all over the place doing as many things as possible. Those are the defining characteristics of these two candidates. And I think you're right. I think both of them took a little while to get warmed up. It's funny because we always hear that Donald Trump is the one who goes for the personal attacks. She was the one who jumped in first with the personal attacks this time and did it multiple times over. Yes, he took the bait on those things. But I think at the end of the day, she tried to get a rise out of him. She did get a rise out of him. But that's the indignation that I'm talking about. He showed that indignation in 2016, you remember, on the debate stage with Hillary Clinton, and it worked out well for him. So I reckon in the cold light of day, he probably, you know, I would say this because I have more sympathies towards Donald Trump than Kamala Harris, but I think he probably nicked it on that consistency point.
People are saying that he hasn't quite been the same since the awful incident in July, the assassination attempt. Is that just his enemies defining him, you know, wanting to sort of talk him down, or is there concerns in Republican circles and the circles you mix in DC that there's just something that's not quite there with Trump and he's sort of been slightly knocked for six?
Well, I've certainly not heard anybody say that they think he's off his game. I do think, you know, people are talking about how it's changed him. He's certainly in interviews been a lot more thoughtful about life and about his life and the preciousness of it. He talks now a lot about, you know, God intervening in that moment. He's leaning a lot more into, you know, sentimentality in a lot of ways, which, you know, as an older man who just had an attempt on your life, you might well do. But I've known him and I've talked to him, you know, many times over, sometimes short periods of time, sometimes long interviews and long conversations. And I'll say this, there isn't anything that makes me worry that he's he's sort of, withdrawn into himself at all. I think that is part of what the opposition are trying to do. What it probably does, though, that they probably aren't aware of is it humanizes him a lot. And I think a lot of people out there have a different perspective on him since that, as you say, horrific incident in Butler, Pennsylvania.
In typical this, we saw a lot of heat, not much light tonight. Obviously, both camps talking to their bases. There was one genuine news story, I think, out of the debate, and that was the Trump comments about Ukraine, and that's going to have huge diplomatic repercussions around the world. And he's not even president anymore, or again. He was very clear, and I think the clearest he's been, that he will bring Putin and Zelensky to the table. In the UK, Nigel Farage made similar comments to that in the election in July, and actually suffered for it. His poll ratings took a bit of a dent. Is it as a toxic issue in the United States as it is in the UK, or was he talking to a slice of the electorate that would like that war to end on any terms?
Well, most of the electorate is war weary. How you bring those wars to an end is the point of contention, right? And that was the conversation you saw take place on stage. The debate anchors asking, do you want Ukraine to win, versus him saying, I just want the war to be over. And when you take those two candidates and their answers for what they were, with Trump, he talks about war in the sense of human life and human cost. And Kamala talks about that war and any war, actually. They talked about the Middle East too, in the sense of the, propping up of an ideology. A lot of people are fed up with that, and not just because of the cost of human life, the $5 trillion it cost America in those forever wars in the Middle East, how those wars ended, particularly with Afghanistan. That came up tonight as well. But yeah, I think, barring endorsing the use of nuclear weapons on either side, you have to get to a point, and that's what Donald Trump understands, and much of this country understands, we're actually just bringing both sides to the table and negotiating a peace.
Even if the peace means Ukraine giving up territory that was, rightfully theirs on sovereign lines just 2 years ago.
No, in most negotiations, people come to the table with very different ideas, and they end up somewhere in the middle.
But Donald Trump knows the art of a deal. You've got to come to a negotiation from a position of strength, and comments like that don't help the Ukrainians, does it?
Well, I don't think it's about helping one side or the other, Harry. This is about stopping.
It is when there's a tyrannical tyrant in the Kremlin.
Yeah, but I mean, America has intervened in many wars, in many theaters, with many dictators around the world. Saddam Hussein, Bashar al-Assad, Muammar Gaddafi, and those places ended up worse off because of the interventions. How about, for a moment in time, we think of the Western world as not being the global policeman, but actually just stopping the waste of human life at mass scale?
All right, we're not going to agree on this one, I suspect. I think we've had this out before. Just on the format of the debate, quite helpful questions for the Harris camp. The moderators throwing her a couple of juicy bones there and allowing her to sort of define herself. Do you think it was a fair fight?
Well, look, I don't like to blame the refs. In advance of these debates, it was made abundantly clear to everybody who wanted to know, who runs the news division at ABC. That's a friend of Kamala Harris's for the last 30 years, and the best friend of her husband is that person's wife. They're campaign donors to Biden. They were campaign donors to Harris. Both the debate moderators have spoken glowingly of Kamala Harris, spoken very negatively of Donald Trump in previous years. But at the end of the day, Trump and Trump's team agreed to the debate on those terms, so I don't think you can complain about it. You walk into that arena, you know who the referee is going to be, you know what the rules are. And yes, they intervened more for her than they did for him. They intervened 0 times on his behalf, 7 times on her behalf. But that is what we've come to expect.
And just while I got you on Trump's team, there was some sort of whispers of personnel changes over the summer. They seem to have died down now. Is this the team that's going to deliver Trump the White House?
Well, they've added a couple of new people in the last couple of weeks. They've added campaign veterans such as Corey Lewandowski. They've added another layer of sort of deputies like Alex Pfeiffer, like Alex Brusewitz, like Taylor Budovich, who are all working in adjunct to the campaign. They've put them in there now as well, bolstering the team. They've added Dr. Ben Carson as another moderating voice in there for people who I think, and I'm on the record about this, who were getting it a little wrong over the summer, who agreed to that early debate with Biden, who have not perhaps plowed enough resources into the swing states, boots on the ground, get out the vote operations. So the team has changed. I think they will probably add one or two more over the next 30 days or so, but this is it. This is the final, 54 days now, the race to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I don't know that we'll see another debate, which is the really weird part of it.
Raheem Kassam, thank you very much for joining us on Never Mind the Ballots. Get some sleep, though. You're on a better time zone than I am. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.